What if I told you the sweetest thing on your table once behaved like oil? Not a snack, a strategic resource, the kind that built empire and triggered wars. And the craziest part is, most people never notice it. Today we're talking about the sugar wars, the real story of how sugar helped build an empire. And by the end, you'll understand three things. First, why sugar exploded from luxury into obsession. Second, how sugar created a system so powerful it shaped politics and war. Third, why tiny islands and tiny laws could move the entire world. And yes, it still explains how power works today. Okay, zoom in. Sugar sounds harmless because we only meet it at dessert. But in the early modern world, sugar was a multiplier. It made bitter drinks easier to love. It made cheap calories easier to consume. It turned ordinary into addictive. But here's the twist. This isn't a story about taste. This is a story about bottlenecks. Because sugar didn't come from everywhere. Cane sugar depends on climate, so production clusters, often far from the people who want it, now combine three ingredients. Small production zones, mass demand, ocean shipping. That creates a machine where whoever controls the source controls the price. And once price control enters the room, peace usually leaves. So what does an empire do when it sees a resource like that? It doesn't just trade. It builds ports. It protects routes. It hunts smugglers. It turns islands into fortresses. Remember this. For an empire, a sugar island isn't an island. It's a money printer, floating in the sea, and the sea is the battlefield. Now, zoom in again, because this is where the story gets uncomfortable. Sugar, at scale, required massive labor. Across the Caribbean, plantation systems became a defining part of island economies, and enslaved Africans were a primary labor source until slavery was abolished. And this matters for one reason. When a resource is insanely profitable, the system around it becomes ruthless. Now zoom out to the ocean. This wasn't just farming. This was logistics. Ships timed to seasons, routes protected by guns, ports controlled by rules, insurance, credit, and contracts that made the whole machine repeatable. It wasn't who had the best sword, it was who had the best system. And once a system prints money, governments start writing laws around it. Here's a mini payoff most people miss. Sugar doesn't just shape colonies, it shapes tax policy. In 1764, Britain passed the Sugar Act, aimed at tightening control over sugar and molasses trade and raising revenue, especially after the French and Indian War expanded imperial costs. Translation: sugar wasn't just food, sugar was government math. And now we hit the real sugar wars energy. When you tax a high-demand resource, you create smuggling. When you crack down on smuggling, you create anger. When anger spreads, history starts to shake. Hold that thought, because we haven't even reached the biggest sugar shock yet. Because in the late 1700s, one colony stood out like a superweapon. Saint-Domingue, what we now call Haiti, was a French colony built around sugar and coffee industries. By the 1760s, it had become the most profitable colony in the Americas. And shortly before the Haitian Revolution, Saint-Domingue produced a massive share of the sugar imported to Europe, often cited around 40%, alongside a large share of Europe's coffee imports. Think about what that means. If that production breaks, the entire market panics, and that's exactly why sugar isn't a cute topic. It sits at the center of power, resources, routes, institutions. When any one of those gets hit, prices jump, policies change, and empires react. And here's the modern mirror. Back then it was sugar. Today it's energy, it's data, it's microchips. Different resource and same game. So here's my question. If you lived back then and someone offered you a deal, guaranteed control over a sugar supply chain in exchange for political compromise, risk, and moral cost, do you take it? Yes or no? Drop your answer and your reason. Because the uncomfortable truth is, history isn't just kings and battles, it's bottlenecks, it's supply chains, and it's whoever controls what everyone else can't live without.